So this session will be all about beekeeping, and we'll be talking about what it means to keep bees sustainably in the UK. But you'll see that our panels also bring to bear views and experiences from all around the world, really. Chairing is me, I'm Giacomo. I run projects and courses at Bees for Development, and we are an international charity. We support rural communities to generate wealth through beekeeping. And everywhere we work, we see that bees are healthier when they are kept undisturbed in landscapes with lots of different flowers and, crucially, less pollution and agrochemicals. We're also active here on the border between Wales and England, teaching natural beekeeping and campaigning for policies to protect habitat for pollinators. Joining us are Nicola, Monica, and David. And I have some questions for them, and hopefully we'll have at least 10 minutes to take a few questions from you towards the end. So I've asked Nicola, Monica, and David to bring a few photos to introduce themselves, their bees, and their work. Nicola, would you like to get us started?
Thank you, Giacomo, and hello everybody. My name is Nicola Bradbear, and I run the organisation Bees for Development. We're based here in Monmouth in South Wales. But we work with beekeepers in the poorest countries around the world, where beekeeping is the most wonderful livelihood. And as we will talk about today, it helps people to maintain their habitats too. And we believe that this is the situation here in the UK as well. And we want to talk about what really is sustainable beekeeping in the UK. So let me just, as Giacomo said, share a few pictures with you. So beekeeping is this amazing way that people can create income from habitats in the most benign way that is not extractive, but they can create an income and at the same time produce honey and beeswax, which in every culture, every society, these are highly valued products. But even more valuable than that really is that the bees are part of the ecosystem and pollinating. So it's a kind of dual aim of our organization is to help people to build livelihoods, but at the same time to incentivize them to maintain the natural habitat where they live. So by now we've worked in many countries around the world, and people doing beekeeping, but in different ways, with different bees, and sometimes for different reasons as well. So there are many nuances in beekeeping. It's not the same everywhere. It's not the same situation in one country to another. Here in the UK, honeybees are an indigenous insect. They're part of the British ecosystem. And always where we work with beekeepers, we are intent on always working with local species and races of bees, whatever they are. Just one example, we work a lot at the moment in Ethiopia with some of the most poor people in the world, and they can do this very good, simple beekeeping. And we know that where beekeepers are keeping bees in forests of Ethiopia, we absolutely know that these beekeepers are the guardians of these forests. Season after season, they're placing their hives in the forest, and the bees are feeding on the nectar and pollen in the flowers of the trees. And actually, these beekeepers are gaining their livelihood from the forest and protecting the forest. So it really is the most marvelous, sustainable way to make a livelihood from these tropical forests. We do a lot of habitat restoration work. And again, it's because beekeepers have incentive to see that habitat restored. As soon as there are flowering plants there, they can take their bees there and start generating income from that habitat. It's the most marvelous way to get people invested in their natural surroundings. So these beekeepers that we work with, they're not just creating income, they're helping to maintain biodiversity. And this is this, oh, sorry, this is the same here in the UK. Sorry, I've stopped. Let me go forward to a British beekeeper. there we are, beekeeping here in the Wye Valley. It's the same story. The beekeepers are invested and interested in the habitat using local honeybee species. So we would like to say that beekeeping in the UK is sustainable, and it's a marvelous way for people to create income from that habitat. So I shall stop sharing my screen there and hand over to Monica.
Hello, I shall just try and share my screen here. And there we go. Are we seeing that? Great. So my name's Monica, and I would call myself a natural beekeeper. And for me, here on the borders of Wales and England, this means that I prioritise the health of local bees and the health of the land and the flowering plants that support them. We live on a hilltop smallholding in South Wales. It's very damp, marginal land of coarse grasses, docks and soft rush. When we arrived, it had been grazed as pony paddocks. We asked the local wildlife trust if there was anything here we needed to conserve. And they said, no, anything you do to it will be an improvement. So we wanted to produce food for ourselves, but also for bees. But our long-term priority became restoring the local ecology of the land. So we started managing the land for biodiversity alongside producing food. There were good mature trees already, but we have created ponds, wetlands, we've created copses, hedgerows, orchards, and garden areas for fruit, vegetables, herbs, edible, medicinal, and otherwise useful plants. The wildlife started to return immediately, not just the pond life, the dragonflies, newts, waterfowl, but also songbirds, the mammals, and the raptors. And also managing the land for biodiversity allowed the local flora of species-rich meadows to return. 13 years after that first visit from the Wildlife Trust, they designated us a local wildlife site. At our last count, we had over 150 species of flowering plants, including orchids. And those flowers bring pollinators. It brought bumblebees, solitary bees, butterflies, moths, hoverflies, wasps, and beetles. But we also do keep bees. For us, all our healthy bees need an abundant, diverse nutrition throughout the seasons, from early spring to autumn. Our honeybees are forest creatures, so most of their foraging is in the local woodland. Meadows and gardens provide forage once local deciduous trees have finished their flowering in the spring and early summer. We would aim to see in our land a dozen or more species of flowering plants every day throughout the spring and summer. Bees need abundance, so we would be aiming for hundreds and thousands of blooms. And this has been good for all our pollinators. And as you can see from these photos, only one of these bees is a honeybee. So for our honeybees, what does this mean? For me, we've been restoring a healthy and locally adapted population of our indigenous British honeybees. They live in the wild, in the trees, in the forest, in church walls, and in my apiary. They're all the same wild bees. We started by collecting swarms from places locally where the bees are living wild. We found the native bees that are surviving and thriving without any interference from humans. We have a natural apiary. We space our colonies far apart. Many are high up in trees. These nest boxes or log hives are the right size and location for the bees. Colony density is low. We put up lots of nest sites, but the population of honeybees has stabilized itself and remains now fairly constant over the years. We don't feed or treat our bees. We don't move colonies. We don't split them or unite them. We allow them to swarm. Colonies live their natural lives with no interference from us. But we do practice close observation at the hive entrance, and we keep detailed records. The bees are healthy and fit into their ecological niche as native wild bees. We only provide the nest sites, just as we do for birds and bats. And as I say, we now have a stable population with genetic resilience that's well adapted to the local forage, to our long winters, cold, wet springs, and erratic summer weather. So our focus is on health and resilience of the whole population of bees, but we all do also keep a few more conventional hives from which we can harvest honey and beeswax, and this supplies ourselves, family, friends, and neighbours. Bees, all our bees, require diverse and abundant diets, good nest sites, and adaptation to their local climate. So my beekeeping prioritises local bees, good nutrition, and nest sites. I firmly believe that if the land is healthy, our bees will be healthy, and our beekeeping will be completely sustainable. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now and hand over to another.
Are you ready, David?
Hi, I'm David Wainwright, and I'm a bee farmer in the UK. And I've also work with beekeepers in Africa and import honey and beeswax from the village beekeepers. This is how we try to sell our honey from our own hives, just keeping the honey separate according to these different apiaries. We've got about 90 apiaries in different parts of England and Wales, and according to the flowers which the bees find around the apiary, the honeys vary from place to place. They're different colors, they're different flavors, according to the plants the bees found to forage on. And we label them up with different labels, telling the story of each apiary. This is my story as a bee farmer. So I started off in the 1970s, and I decided I wanted to try and be a bee farmer. I met someone who was a bit of a mentor to me, and I wanted to follow in his footsteps. And it was a way of making a living from the land without the need to actually own any land or inherit any land, because with bees, you have to spread them around the countryside on different farms. And I think it works quite well. The income from a hive is about £400, if you sold the honey in the jars. And I think we need to have more bee farmers in the UK. There's very few compared to other European countries. And we've got one of the highest proportions of imported honey on our shop shelves. And my aim is to try to produce an income from honey, to produce a good quantity of honey and get it onto the high streets, so people have an alternative. They can buy British honey, they don't always have to buy imported honey. So just to quickly run through what we do with the bees over the year. So this is one of the sites in Wales. This is early in the spring, and I'm splitting the colonies to make new young stock, which is going to be my honey producers in the years to come. By the summer, we've made all these young colonies. We've got them on nursery sites like this, and those colonies are expanding, growing bigger, and the main honey producing colonies are starting to fill up their boxes with honey. That's one of my honey producing apiaries. So that's what I aim at with a honey producing apiary. All those hives are pretty even. They're all a group, all started together, and they're in a nice shady spot. They've got access to diverse forage, and they're gathering lots of honey. So this is the nursery site in the winter. These are all the young stock. These are going to become the honey producers next season and in the seasons to come. And at the moment, they're all here on these nursery sites. This was just taken recently. And then our next job is going to be moving those out to empty honey production sites where they'll then stay for the next few years. And this is earlier last year. So I'd moved them out of their nursery sites onto a honey producing site, and they're growing rapidly on the spring forage. They're expanding really fast, and they get put into bigger hives to give them more space. And then once they're in those big hives, they're going to produce a crop of honey in the spring and in the summer. This is up on the heather. So in August, we move our bees up to the heather hills in Wales to get a crop of heather honey. That's a really different type of honey from the summer and the spring honey. It's really thick and it's got a lovely strong taste. And this is a kind of tradition. People have been moving bees up to the heather in Britain for centuries. Even when bees were kept in straw skeps, they were taken up to the heather in a horse and cart. And it's very good for the bees when they come back. They're very sort of fat and healthy. The colonies have got lots of stores of pollen and healthy honey to take them through the spring and be strong the next year. So just on the other side of the world, this is producing honey in Zambia from bark hives. And I feel I've learned a lot of what I do in UK from these beekeepers in Zambia, because what they do there is they don't interfere with the colonies, they don't manage them, they just let the colony go through its natural life cycle. And the colonies are very healthy. And this is what I try to do with my bees. I don't manage them very much. I keep the opening the hive to a minimum and just let the colonies develop themselves. If they start off well in life, if they have a good start to life, they carry on to be long-lived, productive colonies. We still import honey from Zambia. I've been working with them since the 80s. And that honey comes from these village beekeepers, and it provides a livelihood to thousands of families throughout northwest Zambia.
Thank you all. Amazing pictures. Okay, let's jump straight into one of the hottest topics right now, which is the notion that beekeeping is somehow damaging to wild bee populations. So, David, let's start with you. So last spring, you worked with supermarket chain Marks and Spencer's to bring 600 hives onto 25 British farms as part of their Farming with Nature project. But when M&S promoted the initiative, The Guardian reported a backlash over the plan to release 30 million bees. The initiative was called out as bee washing at its most blatant, and an ecologist was quoted as saying that it's not natural at all, it's farming, which of course leaves those of us trying to promote agroecology somewhat lost for words. So there is a vocal coalition of conservationists behind this backlash, and they do have a point that too often corporates put a beehive on a roof and say they are saving the planet because of it. But I helped David move some of these beehives onto those farms, and this is an altogether different story. So David, can you have a go at convincing us that moving those bees onto those farms wasn't an environmental disaster? Are you worried that your bees may be out competing local pollinators?
It was an amazing couple of weeks of publicity. I was very surprised to turn on Radio 4 at 5 o'clock one day and discover that I was second on the news and Vladimir Putin was third. I was apparently more important and got better publicity going than Putin himself. So that was quite an achievement. I don't suppose I'll ever do that again. Yeah, what I have observed on, in my life spent looking after bees, is that honeybees and the other native bees don't compete. And if we're talking about declines in insects, which is the reality across the world, I don't think that competition between honeybees and other bees is one of the major factors. I think the factors are all well known, and pesticides and habitat loss is the vastly important thing. It seems strange to me that I'm up there with Putin on the news, and the big pharma companies producing all these pesticides are somehow not talked about. I actually think we need more honeybees in the UK. We used to have a lot more honeybees. We used to have a lot of small scale kind of peasant honey producers, and we don't have that type of person anymore. Beekeeping is mostly a hobby, and then there's a few bee farmers. We produce very little honey. Of the honey consumed in the UK, it's just a small percentage. I think from what I've observed with my bees, I would say that there's a misunderstanding about competition between native bees and honeybees. And I think these bees have all evolved together, and they all sort of utilize the forage which is out there in different strategies. It's like an economy, with lots of different traders all plying their different little niches in the market. So what I see that my bees do is they spend most of the time in their hive doing nothing. They're just waiting for the right conditions. And then when you get the right conditions, you get a kind of a superabundance of nectar in the environment. This happened this summer in some bees I've got by my house, which is up a valley in West Wales. It's not normally a very good place for honey, but this season, for some reason, there was suddenly a massive abundance of honey, and these bees got a huge crop of honey, which was produced by the surrounding plants. And something about the conditions in a certain day, in just a few days of a year, enable the bees to gather all the honey they're going to need for the whole year, just in those few days. So at that point, there was honey, nectar in superabundance for as many pollinators as could be there and could find it. I can't see that competition could be happening in a situation of superabundance like that. So the people talk about bees, they use an analogy of bees and sheep, that you wouldn't put a lot of sheep into a nature reserve. Those sheep would graze all the grass and then there'd be nothing else for anything else. But that isn't what happens in my experience, because the bees spend most of the time doing nothing. And then they go out to get the honey when there's a massive abundance of honey available. So I'd say, if we're going to be campaigning about something which is going to make a difference to insect life, we should be campaigning about big pharma, not small farmers like me.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
That's a lot of interesting point, a lot to take in. Monica and Nicola, I want to hear your view on this as well. So you both chase insects around your gardens like paparazzi and have several colonies of honeybees there as well. And you keep up to date with research in pollination ecology. What do you make of David's argument that honeybees have co-evolved with other local bee species across the UK? They've carved their own ecological niches, and this niche is to kind of take advantage of big blooms when there is a superabundance for all pollinators. Does it resonate with your experience, Monica?
Well, I think it probably does. Honeybees are native to Britain. They are part of our local biodiversity just as much as our other bees and pollinators. And here at least, they do have distinct ecological niches. They all have different foraging preferences, for example. I would say our solitary bees are very seasonal. Many have a preference for a particular species or genus of plants. The bumblebees are more generalist, but have different tongue lengths. So, for example, those with quite long tongues can access flowers with long corollas, such as field beans and red clover, which are completely inaccessible to short-tongued bees. Honeybees are generalist, but they have short tongues, and so they are more restricted in their foraging. The temperature makes a difference. Many bumbles forage at very low temperatures, and that's useful in the UK with our erratic spring and summer weather patterns. However, I would agree that honeybees are very good at determining the efficiency of their foraging, and that's foraging for a great number of bees at any one time. They are forest creatures, so they have evolved to make use of trees that produce thousands of flowers at once. And here, of course, that's some are native maple, sycamore, lime, chestnut, but also our apples and top fruit. It also means that they are good at monoculture crops. Their foraging range is greater than bumbles or solitary bees, often 5 times as much or more. So that gives them access to monocultures as well. And I would say on our land, there are comparatively few species which seem to be equally appreciated by honeys, bumbles, solitaries. The one thing I would grow that they all love is willow. And the sight of an early willow, a tree with the buds just breaking, completely buzzing with all sorts of bees is a delight to the heart. White clover is also good. I would also agree that the main threat to our biodiversity is lack of forage. And that's lack of forage throughout the seasons, not just, and that's from spring to autumn. And the lack of nest sites, because our native honeybees need nest sites as well, the hollow trees that used to line our countryside. Much of our conventional agriculture that land offers little or no food for any pollinators for most of the year, and little or nothing in the way of good nest sites. So I would prioritize diversifying the forage, the flowering plants on our land, and just letting things flower. So yeah, I think the main problems for all our bees are really poverty, malnutrition, and homelessness. Lack of nest sites, too little forage, too little diversity, and the lack of any resources to improve their own situation.
Yeah, that's a very apt analogy. Nicola, do you have anything to add there?
Well, I'd definitely add to Monica's list pesticides, of course. And we've heard some fantastic talks in the last couple of days about pesticides, what they're doing to us. And of course, they're an incredible problem for our bees, but for all of our insect bioabundance and biodiversity in the UK. I think that the question we're answering is about whether honeybees outcompete with other species. I mean, if that was the case, we'd only have honeybees here in the UK. They would have long since won the battle. Of course they don't. They're part of the tapestry. There's no single pollinator insect that can successfully pollinate all flowers. Large insects cannot pollinate small flowers. If you walk through a crop of, we all know that honeybees feed on oilseed rape and they're important for pollinating it, but they're not the most important pollinator. The most important pollinators are little flies that don't even have an English name. The honeybees are just part of a great, rich diversity of fauna that is pollinating the diversity of our flora. And they don't outcompete. As David said, we don't have anything like the number of beekeepers that we used to have 60 years or so ago. We need more beekeepers, we need more honey production in the UK, and that means more honeybees actually, along with, of course, all the other insect pollinators that we have to restore to their bioabundance.
Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, all great points. So David and Monica, both of you drew attention to the fact that honeybees are well adapted to making the most of big blooms. So when there is a superabundance of nectar and pollen. So it follows that they're kind of good allies to aid pollination on farms, which is something, of course, we know. They often get moved into oilseed rape fields, forage fields, and of course, fruit orchards. So this is a question around pollination. Is there much demand for beekeepers to provide pollination services here in the UK? And kind of what else are farmers doing to meet their culture's pollination requirements, and sort of what can be done? Do you want to get us started, David?
Because we got so few bees in the UK, honeybees in the UK, I think that most pollination of fruit trees and field crops is probably done by bumblebees in actual fact. I think they're doing the bulk of the actual pollination work, you know, but in order to support our whole population of bees of all types, you know, what we need is just diversity. You know, what I notice is bees in areas, very arable areas where you've just got mile after mile of fields, they don't thrive very well. I'm not sure if it's the pesticide use or the limited diet, but where they've got a diverse forage, they get a diverse diet, that's where I see bees thriving.
Monica, could you tell us something about pollination? David mentioned bumblebees.
I do firmly believe that we all need the full range of our native bees and pollinators on all our land. So yeah, honeybees are good at pollinating large monocultures, and I think David's right that a lot of our orchards are pollinated by solitary mason bees, bumblebees, and they're particularly good where pollination isn't required in a short time scale. The honeybee pollination tends to be brought in on a commercial basis, where growers need fruit to ripen all at once for ease of picking and labor efficiency. Therefore, they want a short and very rapid pollination period. So they will bring in honeybees, a big colony of honeybees, where there are a lot of bees ready to pollinate within a very short 10-day to 2-week period. And that's what our pollinator beekeepers are asked to do. You get your hives in on one day and get them out 10 days later on the dot. So that's an issue for the diversity of our orchards and how we want our fruit picked and ripened. But we have other crops such as tomatoes, which aren't pollinated by honeybees at all. They must have bumblebees for buzz pollination. So in glasshouses and polytunnels, all our tomatoes and things like strawberries are pollinated completely by bumblebees. But we shouldn't imagine that the majority of those crops in the UK are pollinated by our native bumblebees, because we're importing over 120,000 colonies of European bumblebee every year to pollinate those glasshouse crops. And the practice is excused by the obligation to prevent their escape and then destroy the whole colony by freezing after about 6 weeks. But there's no policing of these obligations. So perhaps we could ask instead why we want crops that are out of season. Why do we need fruit to ripen all at once? Why are the labor efficiencies more important than the demands that efficiency places on our pollinators? There are lots of questions we can ask about the systemic exploitation of our agriculture system, which is not kind to pollinators. We need all our bees, and we need to think more carefully about how we use them in pollination and how they can survive in those areas naturally as indigenous bees.
Yeah, it is amazing that there is so little awareness that bumblebees are kind of reared and sold commercially for pollination of quite large cultures, tomatoes, blueberries, strawberries. And that the ones imported here in the UK are supposed to be, you know, a native subspecies, checked for disease, destroyed once pollination work is done in 8 weeks to prevent them from interacting with local populations. But it's quite plain to see that this is not always the case. Nicola, you have kind of seen bees and beekeepers. Well, you've seen beekeepers move bees all over the world throughout your career. Can you tell us a bit of what are the risks involved in importing bees, and do you think there's ever a good reason to import honeybees or bumblebees?
We should never be putting bees on planes and on ferries. This is what we've been doing for the last 40 or 60 years, with catastrophic consequences really for the populations that are damaged by introducing bees from elsewhere. I think future generations will look back on what we have done and be appalled by our practices of moving bees around the world. We're still doing it now. We're moving bumblebees around the world and damaging native bumblebee populations by bumblebees imported from elsewhere. We've already messed up the whole world honeybee population by moving Apis mellifera all around and introducing pathogens and viruses that have so damaged our beekeeping. I think it's time we realized what we've done and just stop it immediately. I wish we could ban all imports of honeybees into the UK. I wish we could ban all imports of bumblebees into the UK. I think it's time we did. It's time we put effort into the industry here in rearing bumblebees for pollination and not needing to import any honeybees. It's completely unnecessary.
Thank you, Nicola. David, I know that you have a slightly different view on this. Do you think there are good reasons to import honeybees in some cases?
Well, I don't know if I have a very different view actually, but on the, just say on the bumblebees, I just think it's an amazing sort of animal rights issue that 125,000 colonies are chucked in incinerators and shredders at the end of the season. I think, you know, if they had 4 legs and not 6 legs, that wouldn't be happening. So find that pretty horrible. I would say, well, I have imported bees in the past for genetic stock to breed from. I'm not sure if I would in the future, but I think that, you know, the main that problem could easily be solved if we just did something in this country to encourage more bee breeding. You know, most of these bees are imported because that's the only option that people have got to get the bees they need. So if we just had better availability of bees to people who want to buy them, then we wouldn't have to do that importing. That's the only way it's going to be stopped.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And
another way it could be stopped is just to ban it. If it was against the law, that would stop it. That's what we would like to happen. Sorry.
I think that would take a long time to actually happen, and it wouldn't, and we could solve the problem quicker and more definitely if we just made it unnecessary.
Provided a good alternative, yes. Yes. So you reckon, David, that one way to have a more resilient, healthier honeybee population in the UK is that we need more purposeful breeding from local stock?
That's right.
Yeah.
But what I would also say is that, in my view, genetics aren't the main thing with bees. It's the family history that is the most important. So in the bees that I have, what I notice is that, you know, given the right conditions, any of these bees will do well and thrive. And what I think is it's the early care of that colony that is most important. Even the mother stock they come from is also important. It's like if their mother is healthy, or like if the cow is healthy, to put it in farming, if the cow is healthy, the calf will be healthy. It's not, and the genetics actually comes in second place, in my view, to that.
That's a really important point, because often they're put as the solution, while here we're talking about a different approach to strengthening honeybee populations here. So what else can be done to support honeybees and a more sustainable and more productive beekeeping here in the UK? What else can be done, Monica? Yeah. David, you go.
Well, encouraging bee breeding, I think, is one thing, but it's just making the environment for bees as diverse as possible. You know, it's all those little field margins, little bits of hedges that are left, little corners uncultivated, patches of brambles. All of that diversity is what that gives the bees a varied diet, and that makes them healthy.
Monica, I know you have some views on this as well, especially in relation to like free living bees, right?
Yes, I would say that genetics are important. Our population of bees we know is genetically resilient. We have had neighbours and people locally bringing in bees from other parts of the country, other parts of the world, and that affects our bees and for a year, and then they revert to our lovely native black bees with good characteristics for cold survival and surviving in very small winter colonies. And for me, that's good, because for me, those are the healthiest bees. When if we bring in characteristics of bees from other parts of the world, that tends to disrupt the health of our local bees. And I do think that we need a background population of a really good, resilient, locally adapted honeybee gene pool. And from that, beekeepers can collect swarms and create and manage in a way that allows them to harvest more honey, which is fine, and that makes a livelihood. But I do think that bees need to be able to survive without human management, and the characteristics that beekeepers have often prioritized, such as gentleness, lack of swarming, or the tendency to create really big colonies, those are very useful for beekeepers, but they're not particularly useful for bees. They don't help them in any way to defend themselves or protect, manage their own health. So I think we should think more carefully about how our local population of wild bees is really surviving, and not create honeybee stocks which are detrimental to that population. But I think we do have, in certain parts of this country, we know we have a really good, healthy population of local honeybees, and those are native honeybees, and we should recognise and protect those along with all our other honeybees. Beekeepers can choose to use local bees and make use of those characteristics that allow our bees to stay healthy without treatment and without extra winter food.
Thank you, Monica. So we have quite a few questions, so I think I'll hold on my last one and try and answer some of the questions you've been posting. So Bryony asks, well, she says that Dave Goulson says bumblebees are more at risk than honeybees. Would anyone agree? I know, David, you replied to us, host and panelists, saying that you agree with this point. I think we were probably all in agreement with this point. And another question was whether we think that beekeeping can be a viable business here in the UK. David, do you want to say a few words on that?
Yeah, I think especially these days, it's more viable than it used to be, because the prices for honey are good these days, and the public want to buy. There's a lot of people want to buy local honey, and if you can, produce your honey, especially if you can produce it, with the exact name of where it's produced from on the label, get it to the public directly, you've got a really good market for it. And in my experience, I'm producing more honey from my hives these days than what I used to back in the 70s. So I think the bees have probably improved, and I don't mess them around so much and just leave them to get on with it, which I think helps. But it also shows that the forage is there for the bees. It's maybe, not such a balanced type of forage, and it's not there all year round as it would ideally be. But like I said before, bees don't actually need a lot of forage all year round. They just need the weather to come at the right time and there's forage available, and then they'll get their crop of honey. So whatever it is, it does work.
Thanks, David. A question for Monica from Paul, asking whether you test for the provenance of your wild bees, or are your bees wild by merit of their activities, location, rather than genetic? Do you have something?
It's a really interesting question, because there have been almost no genetic analyses of the bee populations that are surviving well in mainland Britain. So we don't do mitochondrial DNA analysis or that sort of thing. It's really, really expensive and complex. I would say that all the characteristics we see of our bees, are those of the Apis mellifera, our British bee, and their behavioural characteristics are those of Apis mel. That I would say that where for example, in Ireland, which where they did a study of the wild living, free living bees in walls, church walls, castles, things like that, they did discover that the majority of the free living bees there were very pure Apis mellifera. Now, Ireland has had a very different history of beekeeping and imports, though there are imports, and there is an introgression of European races of bees to it. But by and large, the bee colonies that survive and live well without treatment, without interference from humans, are those that are mellifera, a true British adaptation. So what we prioritize are the behavioral characteristics that allow them to survive and thrive and be good bees to have as part of our local ecology. The population is quite stable. It's not, they don't overrun us. As I say, we have lots of nest sites, but only a comparatively small number of them are occupied at any one time. And that's the bee's choice. Honeybee colonies don't like to live near to each other. In the wild, a honeybee colony will put 1 kilometre or more between itself and every other honeybee colony. So you do get a natural dispersal of the population, which reduces, again, that reduces competition. So I would say that it's hard. I mean, it's hard to do a more detailed genetic analysis of our bees, but for us, the local adaptation and behavior, the survival is key.
Thanks, Monica. Another one for you, David. Do you have much experience with urban, peri-urban hives? And could you say if it compares honey from these colonies to honeys from honey from colonies in the countryside? Is there an impact in terms of taste, quality?
Long time ago, I did have bees in London, and it was a very interesting experience. First of all, these were down in the Surrey docks, before they developed it. And when you looked at the bee forage which was available there, it was actually really rich, diverse forage, and loads of it. Because although the place is covered in concrete, there's actually loads more trees and shrubs and weeds than what you'd find in the countryside. So the bees really thrived, and they produced really good crops of honey. And it was really nice honey. It was quite unusual honey, very different from what I was getting in the countryside. And we also had crops of amazing honeydew honey, really dark, strong stuff. But I was a bit worried about, producing honey in this concrete environment with loads of exhaust coming from trucks driving up and down and so on. And I was worried, is this honey pure? So luckily enough, I knew someone who was a scientist working on lead pollution, and I sent him some samples, and he analyzed this honey for heavy metal pollution. And it was actually, in actual fact, it was amazingly free of any heavy metal pollution. So quite how that works, I don't know, but somehow or other, in the process of the plant producing the nectar and the bees converting it into honey, the heavy metals didn't get included. So I'd say the quality of the honey was in many ways better than what we got in the countryside.
Nicola, one for you. Bryony asks, you spoke about stopping the importation of bees. Bryony asks, what can be done? How would it be possible to stop them? Are there any other examples from around the world where this has been possible?
Yes, absolutely. Plenty of examples. If we look at Slovenia is in the EU, but they have banned any imports of other bees into Slovenia. We could surely, now we've got Brexit, we can get a little bit protectionist and just decide to ban them. I would love to see the BBKA, that's the umbrella body for beekeepers in England, and the Scottish beekeepers, the Welsh beekeepers, the bee farmers, Bees for Development, all of us organisations. BIBA, of course, is the used to be the British Isles Bee Breeders Association. We should all be joining together and campaigning to stop all importation of bees. And also the World Organization, which is Apimondia, is very strongly against movement of bees around the world. So it's not just some little islander view. This is really the view of people, professional people involved in the bee sector all around the world, realize what mistakes we've made, and it's time to absolutely stop putting bees on planes and ferries and shipping them all around the world. It's a disaster of our own making, and we understand it, and it's time to stop.
David, you're probably the best placed one for this one. How would one go about starting as a bee breeder? And are there any incentives available from DEFRA or other bodies?
Can I interrupt a moment, Giacomo? I mean, you mean a bee breeder, or do you mean a bee multiplier, if you see what I mean? Breeder implies you're doing some special genetic thing, but what we actually need are people just to reproduce, so we have a greater abundance of honeybee colonies.
Yeah, that's what I meant, of course.
Breeding sort of reminds me of racehorses or something.
I don't think it's quite going to be quite on the level of racehorses, even if somebody tried to do it. I would say if somebody wanted to get involved in that, contact the Bee Farmers Association, because I'm trying to get them to do more to encourage British production of bees, queens, whatever. So the only way I see that we can stop imports is, we've got to do something now. We can't sort of wait for the government to decide in 20 years' time. We just got to get on with it, do something now, make an alternative so that we reduce imports massively. And that's what we're trying to do in the Bee Farmers Association. So talk to them, I would say.
Okay, thank you all. I'm aware we're drawing to the very last minute, so just to wrap up now, thank you all for coming. It's been really good questions and really interesting discussion in the chat as well, and it's been really lovely to learn more about your beekeeping, David, Monica, and Nicola, your work, and to hear your thoughts on some of these quite big issues. I mean, this session could have gone on for another hour probably. So just to say, we're gonna also be keeping an eye on the WOVA chat that we've started. I'll post again, and if you're ever in Monmouthshire, do come and visit Bees for Development in Monmouth. We're a friendly bunch. We've got a lovely little shop with lots of delicious honey and excellent books. We can also recommend some books for anyone who wants to learn more. Bees for Development runs really unique courses in terms of, if you're interested in learning more about sustainable beekeeping and natural beekeeping and making traditional hives. I've just posted a few resources and our website. So yes, thank you all for joining us today. It's been really great.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Goodbye.